Time now to take another look at the morning papers. Here with me reviewing them today are the broadcaster and commentator Alex Andreou and the political commentator Benedict Spence. So welcome back to both of you. And we're going to dive into the front page, first of all, of the FT, Alex, aren't we? Because this is a number of documents have been released today because of the duration of time that's passed, focusing on the Blair government. And we talked in the last hour about some of the suggestions that his government were considering over asylum seekers, but the FT picks up on what he had considered over the Elgin marbles. So to take up the story for me.
Yes, so apparently he was quite keen on signing a treaty with Athens that would basically bypass the issue of ownership and come up with a sharing arrangement. Greece was very keen to reciprocate by making a sort of series of rolling loans to the British Museum of Great Antiquities that would be a sort of 6-monthly changing collection. But I think it makes a rather nice contrast with what we saw of Sunak a few weeks ago, where he snubbed the Greek Prime Minister, and it just ended up being a massive diplomatic incident.
He cancelled a meeting, didn't he?
Because the evening before, because a journalist asked the British Prime Minister about the Parthenon marbles. The Greek Prime Minister, and he responded with the same position that, you know, the Greeks have had for the last 3 decades, as far as I can see. And so it's interesting to contrast, I think, the practicality of Blair in his sort of height, who was all about doing the deals, as it were, how to lubricate international relations, how to make everything easier, and contrast that to this propensity to make things a bit more difficult for themselves that we've seen from the Conservatives in the last couple of years when it comes to international.
Do you think that's the fair way of characterising it? Benedict, what do you think?
I mean, more broadly, I think it's interesting, the discussions that go on around antiquities and treasures and what is to be done with them, because obviously, if you were to sort of empty the British Museum of all the things that have come from other parts of the world, it would be a disaster for the British Museum, of course. But if you sort of set that standard, you open up a can of worms for pretty much every major developed nation that has museums of note, and you create all kinds of precedents for major diplomatic incidents. I mean, you know, let's say actually we were to sort of press ahead with the idea of sharing the Parthenon marbles, which I think is actually not the worst idea, although the practicalities of doing so with very delicate, you know, items might be a bit tricky. You know, what happens then with the Italians and everything that's in the Louvre that shouldn't be there, you know, because it was looted by the French? You know, that's, I think it's very difficult, because from a sort of the perspective of different nation states, especially nation states that were weaker and taken advantage of, this is a matter of pride, but also it's just an incredibly sticky issue. And I think the Parthenon marbles, I think, are one that we can perhaps get away with saying, yes, they can be returned to Greece, because Greece is a stable country, it has the facilities to look after these things. It gets a lot more difficult when it comes to things like the Benin bronzes, which, you know, I know are a particularly sore point for the Nigerian government, not the Beninese government, but when you actually look into how they got into Western collections in the first place, it's because they were either taken as war loot or in some cases were actually sold off by the government themselves. There's a lot of sort of double standards going on. You know, you have this as well with the Egyptians as well, when they say, well, they want X, Y, Z back, and you say, well, how did it get that? Oh, that's right, it was sold in the first place. And this is a difficult question, which is, where does it come to questions of ownership if a previous government has actually made a decent bit of money out of selling these things in the first place, for a later government to come back and say, well, actually, we quite like it back? I think it's perfectly acceptable for us to say no.
As a Greek, I would push back against that gently, because I think there is a distinct case to be made between artifacts that can be enjoyed in a museum environment everywhere and things that are actually part of the fabric of a historic building that's a sort of UNESCO site, which is what the Parthenon marbles are. You know, they are.
What about the Rosetta Stone, which was being used as part of a historic site because it had been used as a castle wall?
I'm not here to argue the case
I know, I'm just being
against the Rosetta Stone. I'm just saying you're not talking about statuettes or bronzes or gold masks. You are talking about, you know, there are 7 caryatids in Athens, which are those female statues that acted as columns on the side of the Parthenon, and 1 on her own in a room in the British Museum. And that to me seems sad, and it seems like no one is getting the benefit of that. That room could be populated with the most incredible treasures of their own that would actually get more people to the British Museum.
Okay, we're going to move on because this is something that we've been talking about for decades and probably more for decades to come. Who knows?
I could talk about it for decades.
Yeah. We'll have you back on sometime to talk again about it. But in the meantime, let's take us to the main story on the FT, Benedict. Because
yes,
we talk about
Washington steps up efforts to choke funding for Tehran-backed Houthis, and I think that is the key thing: is that they are Iran-backed. What the story is talking about is that different groups based in Yemen, but also in Turkey, and also there will be others based elsewhere, will come under US sanctions in a bid to try to prevent the Houthis from carrying out their activities in the Gulf of Aden, which is disrupting international shipping. It's making it very hard for people to sort of use the Suez Canal. So you're seeing people taking the sort of more Magellan-esque route around Africa, which is causing a lot of problems. It's pushing up prices. But I'm afraid the issue around this is the Houthis they're not a new phenomenon. They've been in power across Great Swathes of Yemen for some time as a proxy of Iran, with exactly this intent in mind, to be able to be used basically on the international stage. And that allows Iran to commit foreign policy without having to get its hands dirty. This isn't really, cutting off a few international groups and funding them isn't going to do anything when you look at quite how much the IRGC pushes into funding them in the first place. That's where they get most of their weapons and their equipment from.
Okay, let's move on, Alex, to the Telegraph, and this is the front of the business section, isn't it? And it talks about fashion brands and royal warrants. So what's the link?
It's such an interesting story. So about 800 firms hold a royal household warrant. And this is big business for them. It allows them to use the royal crest, and they advertise it very heavily. It's really linked in their trading success, especially in South and East Asia, who does value the royal warrant on these companies. And a lot of them are quite scared that King Charles will demand of them sustainability and green credentials that they won't be able to pass. The quote is, the level of questioning that will go into these applications could be quite challenging for a lot of companies. I think that's a broadly positive thing, to be honest. This is within his gift. This is one of the discretions that the Crown has to make obliquely political points, small p political points. And I think, a number of losers will also mean a number of winners. There will be other fashion companies that do have better green credentials that may gain a warrant that they wouldn't in the past. And why shouldn't we favor those companies? It's extraordinary that fashion is responsible for 1/10 of global emissions, according to the UN, and it contributes 20% to plastic production. So this is not a small deal.
No, it's a big industry.
It's a big industry.
That's being targeted by people concerned. And we are going to move to The Sun, and this is a story that you may not know that we're going to talk about. That's fine. But this is about the fire that wasn't a fire.
Yes.
I think it's inside The Sun, so forgive us if you've not seen this, but let's just show people the pictures, because the Sun, they're calling it Black Fool Tower, and this was when emergency services responded to reports of a fire, and it turned out that it was orange netting, which really, if you look at the video, it really
does.
Like a fire, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But a few red faces there. It was orange netting flapping in the wind. It must have got a few people very worried, though, about this iconic site. So there's the
really
footage
does.
of it.
You can sort of.
And if you see further up, there's a sort of a cloud formation that even looks like a sort of wisp of smoke. It's really quite.
It's phenomenal. It's just a massive optical illusion managed to grab headlines everywhere. But I think Alex was saying earlier that we had the situation where we had the tornado in the north of England, then immediately afterwards talk of Blackpool Tower being on fire. And so actually it wouldn't have been completely far-fetched to say there's a major storm and something might have happened. And then very quickly, within a few minutes, just like, it's a false alarm, there's just nothing else going on, and we got a little bit ahead of ourselves. It's just a net. Relief all round.
But reassuring that there was a big response.
Yeah,
If it had
at least
been
somebody
the case.
noticed.
I wonder if we can just squeeze in the story about the dogs, because
Oh, yes.
I love this. It's the front page of the Star. Who woofed all the pies, they say.
Yes, I am shocked they didn't go with fat dogs and Englishmen. But this is a story about how we tend to overfeed our pets a little bit during the holidays, and a lot of them need to go on a diet after the holidays, as indeed do we. This is a perennial argument in my house. We have cats,
Yes.
but you know, I am the person saying the cat doesn't know it's Christmas. Why are you? Because my partner is like, well, it's Christmas. It's like the cat has
Another
no
mince pie.
concept of Christmas. Why should it suddenly have salmon?
We also, give treats out to the cat and then find out that everyone in the household's done the same thing. Yeah, it's a perennial problem.
Cats have a concept of food, and that's enough, and it is perpetual.
Yes.
I don't have a dog. I do have a fox. It ate very well this Christmas.
You had a fox?
Yes, I've got foxes that live in my garden that have been there since they were very small, and I dote upon them because I'm not allowed to have a dog. So, yes, the foxes ate very well this
But look at
Christmas.
that dog.
That's amazing. Did you feed them then?
Yeah, I left them quite a lot of chicken. They had a great
They
time.
will need to go on a
Yeah, they
diet.
will.
We
The
had a
laziest foxes in London.
Well, we had a fox that used to come through our cat flap.
Oh,
It's not good for your shoe collection. I can tell you
No,
that.
it's not.
No.
Yeah, that's true.
I think we're out of time. We are out of time. Lovely to see you both for now. Back in an hour's time for another look at the papers. For the moment, thanks very much indeed. Now then, you're watching Sky News Breakfast.